That Game Company is famous for their artistic and experimental approach to game design, as demonstrated by their flagship title, Journey. But this video will focus on two games that preceded it, 2006's flOw and 2009's flOwer, specifically the PlayStation 4 versions. In flOw, players navigate a small aquatic environment feeding on other microorganisms to grow in size and stature. Mass is accumulated by targeting the surrounding organisms and their glowy bits, breaking down larger specimens into smaller, digestible chunks. Some edible cells have special effects, like turning the character red and aggressive, accessorizing their appearance, or most importantly, changing the depth at which the player swims. Descending to lower levels will grant access to different kinds of playable creatures, each with a unique ability activated by pressing almost any button on the controller. Diving deep enough will eventually roll the credits. It is highly recommended to switch to a different organism when given the chance, because the slight differences in their abilities provide some much-needed spice to the otherwise repetitive and monotonous gameplay, not helped by the limited sound effects. Strangely, consuming things has no bearing on progression. Instead, players need only find the red cells which spawn automatically, making any and all challenge negligible, and trivializing the game's one and only core mechanic of eating. The only noticeable punishment is being forced to a higher level when aggressive organisms land an attack, which does little more than waste time. The game apparently features dynamic difficulty scaling, but that doesn't mean much when the challenge is practically non-existent. For these reasons, the game probably should have required gaining a certain amount of mass to continue, because there's nothing rewarding about strictly pursuing red cells. Another point of contention is the controls. The game utilizes motion input by tilting the controller to redirect the organism on screen, but it's like someone turned the sensitivity up to 100, causing any reasonable motion to fling it around wildly. And after a long play session of wrestling with the character, flOw is physically tiring. While it can be momentarily adjusted to, movement is not nearly complex enough to mandate motion inputs, and for accessibility's sake, it really ought to be compatible with a standard analog stick, which apparently is how the PSP version operates. Having the option wouldn't hurt anything. There are plenty of frustrating components, but when the controls, graphics, and ambience do eventually click, flOw becomes oddly hypnotic. There's a slight anticipation and anxiousness to seeing a large organism below, and quarreling with anything is always a little uncomfortable in a good way. There's something very primal about hunting down prey to become bigger and more beautiful, and fending off aggressors that are doing the same. Egregiously, none of this matters since the progression system grants players the undeserved freedom to skip the entire game, a perfect example of why having options to bypass certain elements isn't always in game's best interest. Moving on to flOwer, here players manipulate the wind to collect petals off a variety of colored flowers, dictating progression throughout the game's 6 main levels. Flowers are often arranged in winding pathways for players to follow, usually ending in clusters which trigger the next path. While gameplay never evolves beyond pointing in a direction and pushing a button, it is good fun maneuvering a growing collection of petals across the landscape, especially when utilizing gusts of wind for an exhilarating speed boost, and it's always satisfying to snag every flower in a long string while maintaining that momentum. For completionists, there are 3 secret flowers per level, earning an alternate title screen once all discovered. The controller's underutilized features are once again put to good use, with well-timed vibrations and sound jingles. flOwer is also motion-controlled, though thankfully its implementation makes more sense in this context, because the player character is no longer restricted to a 2-dimensional plane, and thus benefits from a more free-form control scheme that allows for full 3D movement. It's smoother and more reliable, and unlike flOw, I always felt in control. level, which is the point after all. Though there is plenty of 3D space to fly around in, almost everything of importance is at ground level, barring a few elevated areas like hills and buildings. At first I was disappointed to have no tangible incentive to explore the skies, but then I realized that the ability to fly allows one to scope out the surrounding area from a bird's eye view, which is a valuable asset when searching for flowers not yet bloomed, so it's hardly worth criticizing. The game's use of colors, sound, and smooth camera movement gently guides players' attention to points of interest, distracting them with gorgeous depictions of nature. Contrasting the bleak, colorless cityscapes with the vibrant, windswept fields makes it all the more pleasing to gradually restore color and life to the world, and the environmentalism couldn't be more blatant. But because flOw is primarily concerned with maintaining this sensation, it is often forgiving to the point where some challenges are basically automated, lessening the sense of accomplishment, like flowers that blast players through a set course with minimal input, or massive clusters that are somehow generously collected in one fell swoop. Sometimes flOw will forego gameplay substance in favor of visual stimulation, which, while undeniably beautiful, leaves the game feeling shallow and a little too iterative for any lasting appeal. The biggest praise I have for these games is their incredible ability to evoke powerful emotions without a single word. flOw is a fascinating yet ultimately unsavory experience whose novelty wears off too early for comfort, extending the game longer than necessary despite being up to the player's discretion. flOw is more commendable by virtue of its controls and how it expects a healthy amount of effort to succeed. I'm not ashamed to say that there were several times throughout when I was taken aback by the music and atmosphere, even tearing up at one point. Neither game is polished enough to stand with Journey, but they are decent titles in their own right, and playing them for myself has solidified my fandom of That Game Company's work. It's good that these games are so short given their simplicity. Even without any real replay value, they are refreshingly easy to pick up and finish in one sitting, and because of that, I've put more time into them than is normally expected, which to me is the sign of a great little collection of games, and well worth experiencing at least once.